Rent control simply doesn't do what proponents of rent control will tell you it does.
Hi, everybody. John from TurboTenant. We're going to talk today about some of the legislation that is currently making its way through the process in Washington associated with rent controls and other affordability issues. And we have today joining us from the Rental Housing Association of Washington, Sean Flynn. Hi, Sean. Welcome to the call.
Hey. Hi. Thanks for having me. I appreciate you having me on.
We're excited to have you on. Our users, I know, are not a member of their local rental housing association. So who are you? What's the Rental Housing Association in Washington? Can you provide a little intro?
So the Rental Housing Association of Washington is the premier rental housing association for the state. We represent the entire state, from Seattle to Spokane to Ephrata to Tacoma to Bellingham to Vancouver. And we represent just over 6,000 members statewide. Our members own, on average, just over 2 units. It kind of floats 2.3, 2.4 units. So we are oftentimes belovedly known as the mom and pops of the rental housing world. Our sort of typical member owns a single family home they rent out, or maybe a duplex. And what we like to say is we are local housing provided by local providers. Our members live and work in the communities that they provide housing in, and we are an important part of the framework for our communities. My association provides lots of great stuff for our members, everything from forms to education to advocacy, and there and back again. We're a great org, and you should check us out at RHAWA.org.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah. If you're a TurboTenant user and you're in Washington and you're not a member yet, hop on. Before we jump into the changes being proposed at the legislature level, Sean, could you talk a little bit about the current situation that would be changing in Washington for rental housing providers?
Yeah, I mean, specific to this bill or
yeah,
as
specific
it's
to
been changing.
This bill, the elements that this will be changing, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, so what we're talking about today is House Bill 1217. It is passed out of the House and is now being debated in the Senate. That bill has a lot of different moving parts in it. It's got notice provisions and all sorts of other things, and it's shifting as it's been moving through the legislative process. Probably the largest issue with the bill is that it has rent caps in it, which we are often referred to as rent control. And what, as it's currently written, it would cap the amount of rent you could raise a rent on an existing tenant to 7%. Now that number may or may not move. It could go up, it could go down before all of the stories written on this as the Senate debates it. But yeah, it's a rent control bill, and it would be the first time Washington State has had rent control. In the history of the state, we have not had it yet. We're the only West Coast state without rent control. In fact, local municipalities and counties are not allowed under state law to institute their own rent control. So this debate has been happening at the state for, a long time now, whether we should institute a rent control regime or not. And up until this point, the wisdom of the electeds has been decided that they should not do that. So, but we'll see how it goes this year. And RHA is working very hard to convince our electeds that rent control is bad for the economy, it's bad for housing, and it's bad for tenants.
Yeah, I'd invite you too, because you'd sent over before our conversation a little bit of interesting research that's been done, and also and items what we'll be posting in the description here that you shared that are kind of surveys of the research. So I wonder if you could provide a little bit of the research from the different groups that you're referencing about how rent control might impact housing supply, affordability, and the economy.
Rent control is one of these economic ideas that has been tested and studied for, close to 100 years now. And in every jurisdiction, it's been tried, it's failed in predictable and similar ways. It doesn't take a PhD in economics to understand that when you don't have enough of something, it gets more expensive. And it doesn't take a PhD in economics to tell you when you cap the price of something, people don't want to make that thing anymore. But if you do want to hear from an economist, there are lots of economists who've said that. And at our website at smarthousingsolutionswa.org, you can download what we call the fact packet. And it is 20 plus, and we keep adding to it. We're over 20 now. Academic articles and papers written by everyone from lefties at Berkeley to conservative folks to folks at Harvard, sort of the brightest minds on housing and economics in the country and the world. I think we've got a great one from a German economist who did a meta study of all the different studies that is downloadable. And you can, if you're not into reading long economic papers, we also have one pagers that explain why this study was important and what it says. Or if you want to read all the tables and Excel spreadsheets, they're also linked to that. You can check them out at the website as well. But the long story short is rent control simply doesn't do what proponents of rent control will tell you it does. And what we find again and again and again is that rent control forces rent up, the average rent up in a city that it's implemented in. And it pushes the quality of the housing that's left in the city down. And then it also reduces the total amount of supply that's available. And it does that in a lot of different ways, it stops folks from building new housing, and it also forces units out of the rental market. So rent control is, one famous economist said that the rent control is the most effective way of destroying a city that they've discovered, but for bombing. Yeah, rent control is bad. And while it sets out to solve an important problem that the industry wants to solve as well, is housing affordability, it is a simplistic answer to a complex problem, and it creates more problems than it solves.
Yeah, so Californian guy here, and I worked in Santa Monica for a time, which has a lot of rent controlled units, and experienced a very similar. When I tried to move towards my work, it was virtually impossible. Despite hearing from folks at the bar scene there that they were living at an astonishingly cheap rate. It just made accessibility so much more challenging for me at that time. So this all resonates with me.
Well, yeah, because one of the things that rent control does is it keeps people in units longer than they should be in that unit. Right. It stops the natural economic matching system to unit to consumer. Right. And as such, it makes it very difficult for folks to break into that market. A lot of urbanists will refer to rent control as NIMBYism for renters.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So NIMBYism, for those who don't know, NIMBY is not in my backyard. So it's like it's a term people use for folks who are like, they don't want development in their neighborhood. They want those apartments built in some other people's neighborhood. Right. Because if you're an existing tenant and you somehow win the lottery and score a rent controlled apartment, you now have a intense financial incentive never to leave that unit. And we see that, New York's a perfect example of this. You have units where people are living there for 3-4 generations because they can't afford to leave the unit because they've got a rent controlled unit on the Upper East Side of Manhattan for, $600 a month.
Why would you leave?
Why would you leave? But the problem with that is that you have, folks in a 4-bedroom apartment that is a single person because they can't afford. Why would they leave? And then the family that needs the 4-bedroom apartment can't find one. And so it really disrupts the natural flow. And so people are stuck, right? Some of your listeners may be too young to remember the show Friends, but it was a very popular television show in the 90s. So I'm dating myself here, right? Friends was all set up in a subtext of a rent-controlled apartment.
I've never heard this take before. I love this.
Those young people, right? Joey or all those folks, right?
Yeah.
Rachel and Ross. Rachel and Ross couldn't get married because they couldn't afford to leave the rent-controlled apartment. That's the subtext of Friends. I always tell people, you want to live with Joey for the rest of your life? Implement rent control, right? Yeah, I mean, San Francisco is a great example too, to hit network
Yeah.
TV again, right? There's a reason that Danny Tanner was living with all of his in-laws in a single San Francisco home, because San Francisco implemented rent control and they saw a loss of 14% of their single family homes and out of the rental market. If you want to see, if you want to
Wow.
build a housing economy of the very, very rich and the very, very poor, implement rent control.
I don't want to build that economy, and I'm sure most of our viewers do not. Well, one follow up here, because there, at least so far, until we got into the TV stuff, which I loved.
Mm-hmm.
We've been sort of abstract about the economy generally and about managing the Washington economy generally. I understand, at least from some of the stuff you've shared with me, that the economy in Seattle and Tacoma have had some clear impacts of these sorts of laws changing the behavior of the landlords that might be watching this show, selling off and that kind of thing. Could you talk a little bit about how Seattle and Tacoma have behaved for the independent landlord, or how independent landlords have behaved in the Seattle Tacoma environment?
Yeah. So what we've seen so Seattle went through a period of a very, very progressive city council for about a decade. And they passed sort of ordinance after ordinance after ordinance that was very, very detrimental to the operation of small independent housing providers and large providers as well. And one of the things they did in that time period is they started collecting a registry, so information on the rentals. You had to get a license to do it, which is a pain and adds to the cost of housing. But the good news is that we then had data to track. And according to the city's own data, over that period of time, small housing providers voted with their feet. They sold their units and they sold them in droves. This was sort of a hot topic in Seattle. In fact, when the story first broke, the Rental Housing Association, my org, said, "Hey, we looked at the RIO data. You're losing units." The city council didn't believe us. There was some political tussling back and forth, to the point that the city council budgeted for an outside audit of the data. And so the outside audit report, which you can find online,
Okay.
is pretty damning. Not only did they show a 14% reduction in the stock of single family rental homes, directly related to the ordinances that they passed, they showed a total unit decline as well. And the auditor, it's a great auditor. The auditor did a fantastic job. Went as far as going out and doing informational interviews with folks who had sold their units. And what they found was the majority of folks, actually the super majority, like close to 70% of the folks who sold their rental units in Seattle, reinvested those dollars in still providing housing. They just didn't do it here.
Oh
So,
no.
um, and what's so sad about this for the rental economy of the city of Seattle is that those units that were sold were single family homes and duplexes, triplexes. And in this housing economy in Seattle, those units are not sold to other landlords or other folks who want to provide housing. When that unit gets sold, it goes to a owner occupant, and thus leaves the rental housing market for a
Smaller.
generation or forever, right? Maybe it never comes back as a rental. And so these, and what we like to call those, the totality of the ordinances that Seattle passed in that time frame, is what we call sort of rent control light. It's everything but rent control. And so extended notice periods, they tinkered with the eviction process to the point that it's pretty much broken. We've got if you raise the rent more than 10% in the city of Seattle and the tenant chooses to leave, you are required to pay them 3 months rent. They've
What?
it's called the EDRA, it's the Economic Displacement Ordinance. And so what all of these ordinances did is they had other unintended consequences to the way independent housing providers operate their business in the city of Seattle. We have school year eviction bans. We have winter eviction bans. It is illegal to use criminal background when screening a tenant. There's lots happening. We have a law that's unique in the nation called First in Time, where you have to take the first person who qualifies for your unit. So it's
Does that mean you have to publicize and document your acceptance criteria?
Yeah, so you've always had to do that. You've always had to do that for, actually, well, not always, but for a long time you've had to do that. So first in time is a very technical rule to make sure you're in compliance with, but you have to publish your what's called your criteria, and the first person who meets that criteria gets the unit. Yeah.
Wow. So okay, gotcha. So this type of brand is now being considered, not brand, but type of legislation and consideration is being considered by the Washington State.
Yeah. So, what I say is a lot of the bad ideas that came out of Seattle and Tacoma have been mixed up into House Bill 1217 when it was first drafted. I refer to it as a toxic cocktail. They took all the bad stuff from Seattle and Tacoma and then threw some rent control in there and shook it up. And that's what we got.
Wow.
Now, again, that bill's shifting a lot with the hard work and advocacy work of both my organization and our partner organizations, Olympia. We are working every day to make that bill less bad and convince senators that this bill should not pass at all, because this bill, once again, is toxic for the housing economy of the state of Washington.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm persuaded on this end, and the documents you provided, and we'll share in the documents in the description will, I hope persuade most reasonable people. If it isn't, because there is a housing affordability problem in Washington generally, right?
For sure. Yeah.
What's the positive case from you guys of what we should be doing instead, besides these kind of regulation between the landlord-tenant relationship?
Yeah. So look, Washington State is dead last in housing production. Right. We're either 49 or 50th. I mean, we've not done a great job of producing the amount of housing that we need in our state for literally the totality of my life. And I'm old. Okay. We've lost, it's not great. We're a track record.
You're not that old.
I'm feeling old lately. Maybe it's just a legislative session, but I'm, not as young as I used to be. But we're talking 40 plus years. We haven't produced enough housing. That's the bottom line. Everyone agrees on that, left, right, center. Depending who you talk to, we're either 1 million units behind or 1.2 million, 1.3, 1.1.
That's an astonishingly large number.
Yeah, no one's arguing about whether we're behind or not. It's how far behind we are, and we're epically far behind, right? So the debate isn't. So the economists and the math nerds can argue whether it's 1.2 or 1.1. The point is we are vastly behind on housing.
Yeah.
And when you're that far behind on housing, it creates market anomalies, right? In this case, it's affordability. When you don't produce enough of the product, stuff gets really expensive. And that really affects people. That affects real people in their real lives. And we as an industry need to acknowledge that and offer solutions that are better than solutions like rent control. And one of the things that RHA has been asking for a long time, in fact, we've run a bill on this for the last, 3 sessions in Olympia, is direct tenant assistance. So temporary direct tenant assistance. This year it was called the TAP bill, Tenant Assistance Program, TAP. So you can turn on the tap. When things are problems, turn on the tap. It got a hearing this year in the House Housing Committee, which is really cool. It did not get voted out of that committee, but it's a good sign that we got a hearing.
Wait, I'm sorry to interrupt, but why? That feels unobjectionable.
Well, the progressives in the Democratic Party in the state of Washington did not feel the same way. They felt like rent control was the only solution. In fact, you can actually go to the Washington State Legislature website and watch the hearing on that bill. And you had tenants groups organized that arrived that said that they didn't want the assistance and they only wanted rent control. I was a little shocked myself. because direct tenant assistance, we know from real life experiences, not that long ago, we had this terrible thing called COVID. And what happened is
Yeah.
that gave us a crash course. And don't get me wrong, we all hated COVID. It was a terrible time and we don't like that.
Of course.
But it gave us as an industry a crash course in direct subsidy in a way that never had happened before. We've always had long-term voucher programs such as Section 8 and other things like that, but we had never experienced implementation of direct subsidy in the way we did during the COVID period. Okay. And what we found was one, that getting that money out was more complicated than we all thought it was going to be, right?
Yeah.
And thank you to all of our partners that struggled with us through those years. But two was that when implemented properly, direct assistance injected early into a housing crisis pays off in spades. So rather than waiting for subsidy or spending societal dollars in the process, right? Rather than waiting for the person to go all the way through an eviction process in the courts or moving money through various nonprofits that support that court system, what we found is early money directly into the landlord-tenant relationship. So very small amounts of money could stabilize tenancies. What we found was that $1,200 actually solves most non-pay issues in the state of Washington still today.
Wow.
So, and if you think about it, if you're going to spend $1,200, that's about 2 hours of lawyer time if you're paying for free attorneys, which we do. The taxpayers pay for counsel for tenants facing eviction in the state of Washington. So what we found is if we could just take $1,200 and put it in early in the tenancy when the person has a problem, either they bang their knee up at a church softball game and can't work for a couple of weeks or whatever, you could avoid all of the downstream problems. You don't have to bring in the attorneys. You don't have to bring in the judges. You don't have to bring in housing advocates, which all cost money. And then there's probably the most important part is that the housing provider and the tenants' lives continue on. So that tenant doesn't have to worry and have the mental and emotional anguish of not knowing if their housing is stable. I always like to say that the true housing stability is resources for people in crisis around their housing. And that, so we were excited that our TAP bill, which did exactly that, which is a short-term voucher program for folks that needed it. We're excited it got a hearing, and hopefully next year it'll move even further along in the process. We are also working on tenant assistance both at the county and the state level in the state of Washington as well.
That's awesome. I'm excited to hear that moved forward. I'm sad to hear it. It didn't get voted out of that section of the legislature. Can for the folks that are watching maybe and thinking about their own rentals in different states, are there programs like that in other states that you modeled it off of, or are you guys at the kind of the forefront of thinking about direct subsidy at the state level?
Yeah, so various states have lots of different tenant assistance programs and models. Okay. So this isn't new, right? I would like to think I'm a wild real estate genius and I thought this all up myself. But no, it's not new. And so other states have direct assistance. I think what's different about the way we pitch it in Washington State is that the need is so great in the state of Washington because our affordability crisis is so large, that we needed a whole lot more dollars and we needed a more effective way of implementing them. Less bureaucracy, more direct payments. We've in Washington State, we have what's called a landlord mitigation fund that's run through the Department of Commerce that we modeled it after. And we think that's a good model. So,
gotcha. Awesome. Sweet. Well, this has been very educational for me, and I hope for everyone watching at home. For the landlords in Washington managing their small rental business who maybe aren't a member of RHA there, what message do you have for them? What should they be thinking about and doing right now to help make sure that their rental business is sustainable for the future?
Yeah, well, people say history is made by those who show up, right? And we live in a democracy, which means you've got to participate. And luckily, the Rental Housing Association of Washington has made it easy for you to participate. you can go to, I think it might be you might share a link to this on your site as well, but it's www.smarthousingsolutions.wa.org. And that is the website. You can download all of that cool, what we call the fact packet, all the summaries of the different economic studies. So you can be persuasive both with your friends and relatives, and hopefully electeds if you end up talking to them. And it also has a take action page you can click on and give the website your name and address, and it will put you in immediate contact with your state senator and your state house reps. And you can email them directly from that site, either your own message or we have a template message already set for you. So it's an easy and great way to stay involved and let your local representatives know that you provide real housing to real people in the state of Washington, and that these policies that they're thinking about implementing are going to hurt you and maybe stop you from providing that housing in the future.
Thank you. Appreciate that call out. Is there anything special they should know about joining your association if they admire your work?
Yeah, I think that RHA is a great product. I'm here because I passionately believe that small housing providers add to the fabric of our community. And RHA is a one-stop shop for that. So as things get more and more complicated in the state of Washington, the RHA lease forms database is the best investment you can make to keep yourself out of trouble, because our forms are reviewed not even yearly. I'm talking with the changes in the state of Washington. We have a team of attorneys that review those documents monthly at this point. As changes are happening, we have a forms committee that meets. I mean, every time I turn around, there's a forms committee that I'm attending because there was a change somewhere in the state. And our forms are all statewide and specific. So if you've got a rental in Spokane, we've got a lease form for you that is specific to your jurisdiction. If you've got one in Seattle, we've got that too. If you've got one in East King County, we have that as well. And we have forms not just on the leasing side, but to carry you through all of the communications you have to have with your tenant throughout the tenancy. We have an incredibly robust education platform. So if you want to watch a class on how to pick a roofer or how to properly return a security deposit, you can do that at 3:30 in the morning in your slippers anywhere in the world if you're an RHA member. We also have in-person events. We have link meetings all around the state where you can get together with other housing providers and share tips and tricks and trades and complain to one another if you so choose, that are managed by RHA staff. And then we have as usual, we have a robust political action side of us. So we have a great GA team, we have a political action committee, and we have a legal defense fund. So RHA is a great org. If you're operating rental housing in the state of Washington, you should be a member, because if not, you're missing out. And it is incredibly, for all of the stuff you get as an RHA member, the price cannot be beat. So check us out and join online.
Awesome. Very cool, Sean. I really appreciate it. If you could leave one last message about to landlords nationwide, right? These small housing providers nationwide, what would you ask them to be thinking about and doing right now?
I would say that nationwide, housing providers need to have a louder voice in their local and state and local elections and with their electeds. We provide the housing for the country. A recent study I saw is that 61% of the housing nationwide is provided by small providers.
Amazing.
And as such, we deserve a voice at the table, and you need to get involved in your local associations and your local chambers, because what you do is a social good. For all
Absolutely.
of the talk from the housing advocates, it's the housing providers that actually put roofs over people's heads. And that's a social good, and we should be seen as that. So get involved and don't let your voice be silenced.
Sean, really appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, this was super fun. So thanks so much. And we'll have a lot of links in the description of this video and in the show notes. So take a look and get involved. This stuff is actively ongoing. This is, as we're talking right now, Sean and I, this is happening. It's happening in the legislature. People are talking about it right now. So get involved. It's pretty urgent. Cool.
Awesome.
Thanks, everybody.